Hello and welcome to the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast series. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and I'll be asking today's guest to tell us about their why. This is the series where charity leaders and change makers share the real stories, challenges and motivations behind their work. And in each episode, we go beyond campaigns and job titles to explore the heart of charity leadership and what keeps people going in a demanding sector. Today, we're leaning into those themes of purpose, resilience and community through the lens of children's hospice care and the realities of raising the income that makes this work possible. So I'm delighted to welcome Vicky Smith, Executive Director of Income Generation at Acorns Children's Hospice. Hi, Vicky. Let's start with the key question we ask all of our guests, which is, what is your why?
It's a big question to start with, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something that I've thought about probably quite a lot. It's the reason I moved into the charitable sector. So I think, the baseline of where it starts is I like to make things better. And that's always been the line that comes throughout it all. And driving that change has been what's motivated me from a child. What I want to make a difference. I can very often do things even when it looks so difficult and the road ahead looks really, really clouded. I'll work to try and make some of that positive impact. And I think, really, what that stems for in the charity sector is I like to help make people's lives better. That doesn't always mean that I can deliver the service or that I can do the thing that they need, but I can help provide the resources and the interventions around that even in really dark, difficult times, there's something I'm able to do. There's something I'm able to lean back on. I grew up in a household with two nurses. My mum and my nan were both nurses. And that also shaped my thinking around the importance of sort of healthcare in particular as a real passion and making sure that nurses are championed because we need them from birth until death. It doesn't matter how rich and how grand your life becomes, you still need them the same in those moments of challenge and difficulty. And as family members, as people going through illnesses, as children, as adults, it's such an important role and not always as valued as it should be. And certainly in the job I'm in now, I get the real chance to make sure that is championed, that they are well supported. You can't change the world overnight and suddenly make nurses the best paid roles in the country and disrupt in that way yet. But, you never know that eventually we might start to put a value on things that really, really matter to us rather than things that are just purely a commercial sense. So I think, and in that as well, I guess my other way is sometimes disrupting things, which doesn't always win you friends. And I acknowledge that fair on from the start. But it does mean that, you never change anything if you don't challenge the status quo.
No. So, and within that, when you describe yourself as potentially a disruptor, there's some entrepreneurialism within that, I'm assuming, as well.
I mean, I'd like to think so. I always find it really difficult when people say, how can you be an entrepreneur if you're working in a not-for-profit? But also, I don't know that you can ever give yourself that label. I certainly like to innovate and I like to be creative in how I work and being really solutions focused. I think if that's what makes an entrepreneur, then that's the answer is yes. But I don't know that I necessarily think of myself as having that label.
Okay, well, we'll find out more about that as we go through the interview. So obviously you've worked in charity, you've worked in education, is that right?
Yes.
Healthcare and even engineering, I think, at one stage. So what threads do you think connect all of those roles together, and how did that journey lead you eventually to where you are at Acorns?
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly been a non-obvious journey when you look at it from the start. I think what I've realised fairly on is the thread is communication and relationship building, and that's the same whatever sector you work in, and those skills are transferable. And if anything, more valuable than ever as you get into a world where lots of things can be automated, but the connection you have with people can't be, that you can't replace that. I think when I worked in an engineering sense, it was still the same. I liked to make things better and try to do things better. And you're doing things for society there, whether it's building a bridge or making sure the highways run properly. They're not always the most glamorous things, but they're things that people fundamentally need. And trying to find ways to communicate things better externally and internally is something that certainly started me off. And I was very, very lucky in those early days when I worked for Amy. People gave me a lot of freedom, and they gave me a lot of freedom early in my career to, not necessarily play sounds the wrong word, but try different things to see what I was good at, whether it was the technical engineering, whether it was other things. And I actually found a home in the head office communications team and doing rebrand projects and working on some really creative stuff that really set me up for everything in my career. And even there, I was working on some of the prison facilities management contracts, and I certainly wouldn't have had a job that I later did with an NGO that was on criminal justice reform if I hadn't had that understanding early on. Now, obviously, at the time, you have no idea that that's going to be something, one, you'd become passionate about, or two, that you are going to use it in the way that you do later on in your career. But I think that's the thing that's the thread throughout it, is I'll always seize an opportunity and just try and learn as much as humanly possible, because knowledge is never wasted. And then I'll also, the one thing I do get called quite a lot in is a knowledge broker. It took me a while to really get my head around what that meant. But particularly in the university, that started to make sense a lot more, because it's about connecting the dots and connecting people to make things happen. Not necessarily holding all the knowledge yourself, but you're trying to learn what you can and go, I can see what joins here and here and here. And it encourages collaboration. And generally, I think, that's a better space to be. I made a shift from the private sector into the charity world for a very personal reason. I mentioned my mum being a nurse, but then she also passed away fairly early. She was only 53, of lung cancer.
Right.
Going through a journey like that, very, very close, I'm an only child, meant that I recognised in her, reflecting on her life, how much she'd done and the impact she's had on people. And I went, me and my dad had that moment where you go, if it were me, what would people say? And have I done the things I should have done? And am I just thinking about myself in every decision I make every day? Or am I trying to make things better? And, I realised that although I was trying to make things better, I probably wasn't having the maximum impact that I could. So I shifted to work for the hospice that had cared for her, which was then Birmingham St Mary's and is now Birmingham Hospice.
Right.
And that was the kind of pivot point for me of going, I can use the skills I'd learned in bid writing, in relationship management, in working on partnerships, and take that over into a charitable setting. And then sort of got to understand the world of philanthropy, and did my master's degree in sort of fundraising and marketing at Bayes Business School. And that sort of then took me on a thread to go, right, yeah, this is the career for me. I can actually make a career out of fundraising, because most people don't think of it in that way. And then I'd left Birmingham for London and went to work for an international NGO called PRI, which is Penal Reform International. And they do incredible work around trying to transform justice systems globally. Really complicated stuff that most people would never think, I really care about that, but I did, because of the stuff I'd done before. And I'd been in prisons and I understood the UK context, but also the policy landscape. And that gave me just, an incredible opportunity in a small NGO that I'd have never dreamed of, working at UN level, just getting stuck in, because there's so few people sometimes to make things happen. I remember having to go and speak at the Crime Commission because our head of policy was off sick suddenly, and going, oh my goodness, I don't feel that I should be able to do this. But I did, and it was a great learning experience. And then taking that even a step further, then, get stuck in on international funding and, being really resilient and creative in how you raise money. And then from there, I went to work for Shelter as a national homelessness charity. And again, philanthropy and partnerships was the essence that saw that through, although a different cause. And then eventually ended up back in Birmingham at the university, and now Acorns. So it kind of went full circle of the guilt of leaving Birmingham in particular.
Never
and then
easy.
going, I ran off and did my thing, and wanting to come back. And, the pandemic played a part in that. I wasn't necessarily thinking about it in the same way. And then the right job arises at the right moment. And the university offered me something I'd never done before. I'd always wanted to work in higher education, fundraising, and, particularly work with the alumni and graduate groups you get to meet. It's an incredibly varied role. There's very little like it in anything else I've ever seen, but is a whole different world to work in. And you are further away from the causes, although there is so much more to think about the impact you can make there, closer to the students perhaps, but further from the others. So coming back to Acorns was really a chance for me to bring myself back to something that mattered to me.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny, the first question we asked was, what is your why? And I got a lot of your why in that last response as well. It's fascinating. And it's really nice, I think, to be able to look back and actually join the dots between where you started and where you are now. And it makes so much sense when you kind of go through that as to why you are where you are. When you mentioned the university, and you led one of the most ambitious university campaigns in the country, actually, at Birmingham. Can you tell us a bit about that campaign at the university? Tell us a bit about how you went about achieving what you did and what it was that you did as well, and what it was for.
Yeah. I mean, full disclaimer, they're still in the midst of campaign at the moment. It's an ambitious target. We upped it when I joined. I had an incredible boss there and a guy called Gavin Maggs, and probably equally as crazy as me, decided it was probably a good idea to up it from 400 to 600 million as a target. And, huge for a university like Birmingham, because we were really trying to drive a step change in the impact philanthropy can make in higher education. It is very different when it's about research, it's about driving innovation and impact slightly differently. It's about the student support side of things. It's not quite, where I am now, I'm keeping the lights on. It's a different kind of fundraising. You are looking more to that future gazing and solutions focused way of doing things. But it was, it's incredible to work across such a breadth. The University of Birmingham is a massive place to work. 5 colleges, 1,000 staff. Very, very research intensive, particularly on the medical side. And I was lucky enough to, work across that quite a lot. Cancer research perhaps being the most obvious people would think of, but I had a particular passion project almost of coming out of the pandemic. It made me realise just how important some of the scientists are in the background of things that we don't always think about. And there's an incredible group of microbiologists that are based at the University of Birmingham, world renowned. And one of the biggest challenges the world faces is antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance. And that became something that I really, really got the team to understand and get into. That was the essence of the campaign, really. It was about bringing the why of Birmingham to life as a university, but also as a place.
Yeah.
And really trying to get the topics that people wouldn't realise are game-changing in how the world operates. If we don't come up with a solution to this, our basic operations go back to the Victorian age. You don't want to think about gloomy stuff day to day, but it's huge. And, once you're faced with that knowledge and reality, you go, oh my goodness. But also an incredibly inspiring place to work, because there were people there that not only thought they had the solutions, but they were working on things. They needed to change policy. They needed to influence and do things. And the power of philanthropy and the power of the networks of a university are something that are very, very special and harnessed well. I mean, if I'm honest, I don't think we even scratched the surface of what it can really achieve, because universities are networks for change, and they are that engine house of collaboration when it's done right. And you can really tackle some, lofty, big world challenges with the brightest of the bright in the room, but also people from different sectors, because they can convene different charities, other universities working together. It's just funny, isn't it? Because, you can see all of that, but it's never quite that easy. Otherwise it would happen overnight, isn't it? People are always the challenge in that. But the other side of working as part of that campaign was the regional stuff. The reason I'd come back to Birmingham was because I wanted to make an impact regionally, and I felt I could do that at the university. We worked on some incredible partnerships, one with Birmingham City Football Club that's come to light, and, just how the two brand Birminghams can work together to try and join together and have a big influence. Sport and education, massive things, lots of overlap, not obvious collaborators and ways of doing things, but that's certainly one of the things in my career I've enjoyed working on most. And when you get that sort of togetherness and platform, that's how you transform people wanting to take part in the campaign. It was also a different campaign because it had a really big volunteering hour target, which is the first time universities have done that. Because, again, the graduate community are the essence of volunteering their time back to mentor students, to give guest lectures, but also in sometimes a more professional capacity when they can do more structured roles and help drive thinking and shape the research that really does make it relevant for the future. And I think, it's the essence of education as well, and seeing those very, very bright sparks kind of taking on their journeys in life and getting to play a small part in that. I mean, I still mentor for them now, and I'll always sign up and take on, sort of a student who's interested in the not-for-profit way of working, because I think it really gets under your skin, that essence of wanting to see people thrive regardless of their backgrounds. And education is such a catalyst for change.
You realise when you're working in a university environment, the interconnectedness of everything. And you've talked about all of those different strands and themes that actually, when you are working in your other environments, they encompass those other elements as well, don't they? Sorry, I interrupted, but it's...
No, but that's so true. You start to see the overlap, because even the irony is, even in working with Birmingham City, now at Acorns, I work with Aston Villa really closely, so that there's other side of the house, a different coin, slightly easier, and natural Villa fan rather than Birmingham City, but doing incredible things for the place. And, the powerhouses of sport that drive things through is an incredible thing. But in the threads, healthcare was throughout it. Some of the professors that I worked with at the university work in either the end of life care space or rare diseases. So there was a natural overlap sometimes with what Acorns was doing anyway. So it's not as radical a jump to go back into the charity sector as people might think. I think the one thing universities afford you is you cover such a breadth of things there. There are lots of different directions of travel you can go in after that. But, for me, when the role at Acorns came up, I'd done things with them as a corporate partner almost, if you like, and worked with networks outside. I'd done a Sahara trek across the desert. So I'd always stayed in touch with that. And I think the one thing I haven't mentioned is that I'm also a trustee of Baron Davenport's charity.
Okay.
And that is one of the strands is around end-of-life care and supporting older people, but end-of-life care including children. So from a grant-making perspective, from very early on in my career, the end-of-life care thread had stayed throughout. So I'd stayed in touch with that world in terms of policy, in terms of what was going on, even if it wasn't in my day-to-day job. So then the role at Acorns hadn't been around for most of my career because someone was in it.
Mm-hmm.
Real moment of step change for them as an organisation, and it felt like it was the right fit. Fairly newish CEO, only kind of a couple of years in himself, wanting someone to help him make the mark so that things shift and move forward. And it felt an important time to do that. And also something that really matters for me, because not every... He actually has a really good term. He calls it hospice face. And when you talk about working in hospices, people go, oh, that's really sad, isn't it? It's awful. And actually, it's the complete opposite. You see the best of life. You see the best of people. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's difficult. And yes, you're dealing with goodbyes and really difficult and sometimes traumatic moments, but you're able to do something and make a difference, and things come together in a slightly different way. And, for me, I have always been an advocate, probably even from earlier than I realised, in talking about death and dying, because of being in an environment with nurses. It's not something that you can avoid.
Mm-hmm.
It happens to us all, and you never really want to think about it happening. But it almost goes back to the Greek philosophy of saying, memento mori, and remember death. And it's not to be morbid about it. It's to make you remember to live life to the fullest.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think working in hospices, you get to see that. And that certainly, was what drew me back in, of going, oh, actually, it is something I care about, and something that some people might find really difficult to work in. I do certainly have days where it is difficult, but it's not something I'd shy away from.
What drew you to children's hospice care, which is obviously a very different and deeply emotional environment compared to possibly the experience you had at Birmingham, but not necessarily. You've gone through all of those different elements of your career, from shelter, working at another hospice, working with the criminal justice system, a whole really broad range of different things, with such rich experiences, I imagine, within each of those. But with regards to the children's hospice care in particular, what do you think it is that you touched on it a little bit. What is it that drew you to working for Acorns specifically?
I think Acorns is much bigger than people realise. It's the biggest children's hospice in Europe. It's 3 sites across Worcester, Birmingham and Walsall, and a huge geographic reach out to Coventry, Gloucestershire and South Staffordshire. So it's a really big, broad regional area of care that needs to be delivered. And it's difficult because it's something that no one would ever disagree is needed. Everyone would go, oh my goodness, of course you exist. Why wouldn't you? It's never a question. You're never trying to convince people, why is children's hospice care a good thing, ever. What people, don't realise is that, it's not... Although it's a statutory requirement to provide end-of-life care, how that is delivered is slightly different everywhere. So, you need the voluntary income. So the role at Acorns is challenging, but it's so needed. So I think for me, I wouldn't ever want to do a job where I didn't feel like I could see what I needed to do and how I can try and drive a step change. And, the team I wanted to bring together and build on the brilliant things that already exist. I had some familiarity and understanding of the cause and of the organisation, but a real moment in time to step in and hopefully do some of the best work of my career and work with some incredible people, brilliant as I mentioned, CEO that's come in, who's worked in the children's hospice and adult hospice world in different roles, but really understands income generation because he's come from an income generation background, an incredible director of care who's actually come from the adult hospice world into children's. And, again, that shouldn't sound as radical as it is, but that is quite a radical shift because everybody can tend to view their world as very special. But I think part of what's making Acorns special is a willingness and an openness to collaborate and try and do things differently and to try and look at how, children's and adults care is similar and also very different. It is different in the fact when you're talking about children's end-of-life care, it's not as linear, very often a journey. New treatments become available. Health isn't sort of an instant decline always. You're also talking about such a breadth of conditions from, rare genetic conditions from birth to things like childhood cancers, and any other myriad of things in between. So it takes real diversity and a difference in skill set in the children's hospice sector. And I think, helping and seeing that is the motivator that keeps me going. And also, I think the honest factor is the agility and the difference in the types of organisations. Although Acorns is big for a children's hospice, we can be very agile and innovative. When you're looking at universities, brilliant places, but quite bureaucratic, can be big juggernauts to sometimes try and navigate and move. And I think, I was there for nearly 5 years. I think sometimes you get to a point where you go, actually, I need to be truer to my natural instinct to try and drive things forward. And Acorns feels like I've landed in the right sort of home, although I'm only kind of 9-10 months in.
What surprised you most about the hospice world, do you think? You've talked about a few of those elements and particularly the difference between adult and child care, but what areas have surprised you most?
I think that, I'm always surprised and in awe of when you actually get to be at the front of the service provision and you see the joy that's created and the memories that are made and the happiness that exists in the place. We always know it's such a pivotal point in people's journeys when they actually cross the threshold and come into the buildings or meet the staff and the care team, and you get over that barrier of thinking you're coming into a place where people die. Because that does happen there, but that isn't the essence of what we do and who we are. And I think I knew that, but you just feel it in a completely different way when you get through and get into the midst of the services. And I think also the level of expertise. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but there's so many different types of ventilator tube and the responsiveness of the team to be able to upskill. Mm-hmm. And clinically get ready for a child with very specialist complex needs is phenomenal. And I don't know many other places that can and do things like that. And again, I sort of knew that even from working in the sector, but not to the extent and not to the level of complexity that exists there. And the range of healthcare professionals that work within a children's hospice, because the nurse is the obvious, figurehead, but right through to the healthcare assistants, the physios, the occupational therapists, the pharmacists, even having sort of paramedic prescribers and things that transition into different roles. It really is an allied healthcare workforce that you don't always think about in the same way, and very multidisciplinary, and having an incredible consultant. I also hadn't appreciated the rarity of paediatric palliative care as a specialism in nursing or in the sort of consultancy field. And that is something that is a problem for the UK. And, we're very lucky to have a consultant work with us, but that, a rarer commodity than you'd ever anticipate. And that speaks right back through to the education piece that needs to happen to help people specialise and to help people really focus on an area that they might not think about because they might think it's too sad, or that you can't really make a clinical difference to people's journey if you're talking about end of life. But actually, you really can. And even the fact that the hospice does research, and you don't necessarily, again, think of that as being true, but there is right through to, sort of new mechanisms and ways you can allow people to stay with a child longer after they've passed away, and new technologies that enable that, parents to hold their child and things like that. That's come through research programs, that's come through active projects. They're really important things that need to happen. And again, wouldn't have necessarily even come to my mind before joining.
How would you describe the role of Acorns and the role it plays for children and their families? What is it that a hospice does for children and their families?
Yeah, so it's a really holistic journey that's offered with children's hospices. Everybody's journey is slightly different because of how they either find out about diagnosis or their healthcare parameters that exist in the regions where they are. So there's no linear journey of how you end up being part of being an Acorns family, as we would say, and being part of us in that way. But what we do is try and support people from the beginning through and out the other side to the end, even after someone passes. So from that initial point of diagnosis, helping people navigate appointment systems, better understand what's needed to help them care for their child, to offer everything from respite breaks, which is probably, I would imagine, where most people's mind goes to initially when you think of children's hospices, and the sort of the play therapies and other things, right the way through to more complex therapeutic interventions, the physio that I've mentioned, things that help with the psychosocial well-being of the whole family, including siblings and parents. We've got hydrotherapy pools that enable everything from, again, the family moments of sometimes for the first time being able to play in a pool with siblings with a child that has very complex needs, right the way through to the more physio elements that help with the pain that a child might be in and helping them move and feel relaxed and get the best out of their time with us, and bring as much joy and happiness to the child and the family as we can, being centered around what that child needs. And we deal with all age ranges in that spectrum as well. So again, what a toddler needs is very, very different to what a teenager needs. And we'll have things like, our FIFA gaming suite and our teenage lounge is very different to the sensory playroom that we've got. And what we offer is really that we can tailor to people's journeys, and we help with the complex things like the pain management stays and helping families get on top of things. Also enabling them to stay with us, which is different. We have family flats.
Okay.
We can offer things like that enable that sometimes a closer sense of being between the fear of healthcare provision and some of the challenges sometimes people have faced even to get to the point that they're at. So building that trust and doing those initial stays with us right the way through to end of life care, where you are helping a whole family transition through a really difficult period of time. We have our special bedrooms, which enable children to stay for a longer period of time after they've passed. And those are bedrooms rather than anything else. And families can make them their own. And it gives people time to say goodbye and to grieve and not rush that time. We help people make memories around that. So whether that's the more traditional casts of hands, locks of hair, through to some really creative things like teddy bears that you can keep ashes in, whatever that family needs to help them make memories, and also to guide them in at a time when they don't necessarily know what they need. So you can offer solutions and try and be there for them based on their face requirements, the communities that they've come from. It's really about understanding the individuals. And then as you move through that journey, it's helping them deal with the grief and through bereavement, and offering a place of understanding in that, because we will often say we can't affect the outcome always, and that's hard because you can't necessarily save the children that are in our care. And we want to be able to deliver the best possible journey for that family, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Something that's a very special thing to be a part of. And very often after somebody has passed, families will stay a part of Acorns in some way or form. We are lots of volunteering, but also in memory fundraising and it being a whole sense of wanting to give something back. So that's the essence of children's hospices, really. And
there's
like I
so
say,
many things within that I just wouldn't have even thought of, or you just take it all for granted, just the intricacies and nuances to the services that you're providing, including sort of the age differences and the activities and the mid stages and the end stages. All of those different elements are so complicated. And in fact, the next question is the nature of care that's being provided is complex. Probably more often than not, it is misunderstood. So what do you wish more people knew about children and family, the children and families you support that perhaps we don't know?
Yeah, I think, every day is so different and every day is unique at Acorns. And I know lots of places say that, but because when you deal with something that's really a personalised level of care, you obviously have to standardise certain things. We're CQC regulated. There are lots of healthcare parameters in which we operate within, but it's it's personalised and it's passionate, and our staff, you would expect them to really, really care. And that's not to say that any nurse or doctor or a healthcare assistant in the NHS doesn't care just as much, but people really do go above and beyond in their roles to try and make sure that they think about things holistically and keep the child at the centre of everything, and then the family. So we're one of the only school related organisations that is signed up to the UNICEF Right to the Child framework. And that in itself kind of speaks of the ethos of really trying to give children a voice in their care, even sometimes when they might be non-verbal or they might not be able to communicate in the same ways. So I think it's the level of creativity that exists within the service provision to be able to do that is something people really don't anticipate, because you need to be very resourceful, really good listeners, really empathetic. But it also means that it is quite a difficult operation to run from the back end of things, and that, fundraising is essential. And just to stand still, there's a lot of kit and training needs and specialist roles that exist that we just have to have, that people again probably wouldn't appreciate. It's not just a social care operation, which again I think sometimes can be the perception. It's clinically advanced, and that is the brilliant thing about it, but then also the difficult thing about it.
Yeah, and you've got to articulate all of that in a short space of time to a number of different people at any one time. So yeah, that's a challenge in itself. Without obviously breaking any confidentiality, is there a moment or a story that you think has stayed with you, something that really sort of captures the heart of Acorns that you'd be happy to share with us?
Yes, I mean, there's so many you see it all the time. I mean, I'll give you two. One that was from last week was one of the children that's staying with us at the moment is in for a respite stay while their family have gone away on holiday for the first time in a very, very long time. And they've gone to New York. I think it's a special birthday for the mother in particular. And there was a lot, it's been going on for a long time because the guilt of not wanting to leave one child behind has meant that they've not done this for a very, very long period of time, but finally have been able or brave enough to do that and feel like it's the right time, knowing that their other child is safe in our care. Throughout the hospice, when I walked through, there were all these sort of like New York moments up on the wall, and the bedroom had been made into the New York Plaza Hotel. And there were like just little things through, and there was, a bit about Times Square. And at first I was like, why is Times Square on the wall? But every room had a New York theme. So then, it was talking through, and when, their mum would call in, we'd be able to kind of show where they were, and these sort of like personal touches that mean that there's not a perfect solution in that environment, is that there's not an easy win on either side, but it enables parents to rightly get a break and have some time, but also for the child to feel part of it. And the other one that stays with me is probably much more on sort of the difficult, challenging side of things with it being end of life, and a child that passed earlier in the year through a brain tumour. And one of the most important things in his life was his dog. So having his dog with him and around when he passed was his most important request.
Right.
And, there aren't many places that could happen. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it happen in the timelines right on that moment, but we were able to, quite soon after passing, enable the dog to be with the little boy in question and make some paw prints and handprints for the family so that they could keep them together. And again, it's a sad situation because you couldn't change the outcome, but able to do something that keeps that memory alive and keeps that for the family. But that certainly sticks with me as, what we'll try and do whatever we can to make those wishes fulfilled. And that makes it a special place to work.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing those both stories. They're very emotive, and so thank you for sharing them. I'm going to move on now to talk about funding and the income generation in a hospice environment. That's the work that you do. Obviously, we know that things are challenging generally in our sector. Children's hospices face unique funding challenges. Can you explain how hospices are funded and why there are such significant financial pressures right now for you in the hospice sector and the hospice that you work for?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really pivotal moment for, hospices as we record this. It's in the last couple of weeks, a children's hospice has had to close its doors in East London. Something that you would probably think are unthinkable at different points, but it's happening because all hospices are funded differently. There isn't consistency, very regional, dependent on where they are. And the children's hospices in particular don't get high levels of statutory funding. So they don't get money from the government or the integrated clinical care boards in the way that people would necessarily expect, because a lot of people just think it's an extension of the NHS service, and it's not. So we, as it stands now, need to raise 77% of our funding from voluntary sources.
So 33% of your funding is secure, or it's coming in pretty much?
No, not necessarily. We've even had to fight for that. So we have secured through the Children's Hospice grant some certainty in the next 3 years from the government perspective. But even the rest of that can be contract-based rather than guaranteed income. So it is a tricky picture in how you pull that together, because it's not guaranteed.
And 77% is a big chunk of money, I'd imagine. Are you able to say what that is currently? What does that 77% equate to?
Yeah, so it depends how you split the numbers, but generally speaking, but in income terms, both retail and fundraising have to sort of turn over about 10 million each, so 20 million in total a year to keep that ticking along with the back office operations. If we're talking purely clinical care services, it's 14 million a year, and it's 40,000 a day to be able to run that. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes just to keep things moving. You'll know in having worked in around fundraising, and they're complex operations, because you have to think about, also the team you have behind that needs to be quite sizable to generate that level of income. That isn't always the most fundable thing. People very often just want to fund the tangible side of things. Fairly lucky at Acorns in that they've always balanced the restricted, unrestricted income quite well.
Okay.
Most people give to the cause rather than specific projects when we're talking about charitable donations.
A little bit. So restricted, just for people that perhaps aren't aware of the difference between the two.
Yeah, so when you've got restricted projects, they might be for a specific range of roles or a piece of equipment or a capital campaign, and then you can't use it for anything outside of that. Whereas obviously there are lots of costs to a hospice. For example, the national insurance contribution increase added 400,000. So those sort of things aren't the most glamorous.
No.
We're faced with the rising cost of living everywhere as well, and a growing need for our services. So the beauty of the world is that medicine is advancing more and more and more, but it means that children are living longer, or perhaps kept alive with more complex needs from birth.
I'm going to ask, why is it that you're seeing an increase in demand? And that's why. It's because you'll be able to prolong people's lives, but with that prolonging of life, there are additional challenges and needs that go with that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, and we also are seeing people rightly and better at earlier points in their journey as well, so that you can get them the best support possible. So you're not just seeing them towards end of life, you're actually getting a bit more of an interaction with them at different points on the journey there. And, that means that we already knew there was a gap based on just the medical statistics of how many children have a short and life-limiting condition. And that's 11,000 children in the West Midlands region, roughly. And we see just over 1,000 families a year. So we already know that there's a disconnect there. Doesn't mean that those families aren't getting some sort of care or support elsewhere. It's a complicated picture. But it means that we need to do more. So just to stand still, our costs are rising constantly. And it's over £1 million rising costs without really much service change in the last 12 months.
Yeah, just to get £20 million every year. And you mentioned 14 million. So that 14 million is a proportion of that. Yeah, that is that. But the 77% is 20 million, right? Yeah. Wow. I'll go on to the next question if that's right, Vicky, because I think it's a good time to ask the question. Obviously, we've talked about rising costs and generally people experiencing reduced disposable income to actually give. You talked about increasing demand. So what's the impact on you and your fundraising team and your retail teams in terms of actually living up to that expectation?
I mean, it's a really tough landscape. You have to be pretty resilient.
Yeah.
And competition's all around. There are lots of great
Yeah.
causes out there. And there, is increasing even competition amongst how foundations operate and some of them becoming fundraising entities. Or perhaps even the other side, the limiting of the pool as philanthropists professionalise and really focus their attention in certain areas, there's less available resources that are known about that we can go after. So we constantly have to be creative and innovative and thinking of new ways to connect with people, because there's also a changing donor behaviour and expectations. Digitally in particular, the tolerance of people to go through a process, even clicking through things, is so low, and attention spans are so limited with all of the noise from all of the brands and organisations that are throwing stuff out there. And we don't really have the budgets to compete with that. But if you don't spend a little to generate content that goes out into the digital world, then you don't get the income. So you're kind of in that cycle of you have to be able to do things like that. And platforms are ever changing and evolving. So the team have really got to stay abreast of things and trends. We're working quite hard on that because the skills gap widens without you realizing it, because things have moved on so much in 12 months, it can become almost unrecognizable. But we've got a really good opportunity at Acorns in that we can tell our story differently. We know that a lot of people recognise us as a brand, if you like, so they know that Acorns exists as a children's hospice. But sometimes that's where it stops. They don't really know much more about us. So it's always great to be able to come on things like this and tell the story more often, because you can go into the detail that you can't very often do in a 30-second clip somewhere. And we also want to be able to, it means that partnerships are more important than ever. So the relationships we have with our corporate supporters or with fundraising groups and other things, we have to really value those. And not that we didn't anyway, but we need to make sure that the impact that they have is felt, and that we continue to grow that, because you can't be complacent in any sense. Because if you are, as I said, there's already a children's hospice that's closed a few weeks ago, and we never ever want to be in that position.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, a huge amount of pressure. And obviously, while I've got the opportunity, hats off to all of you for the work you're doing and the success that you're seeing within all of those challenges and demands. And one of those demands is the emotional weight, if you like, of the cause that you're working for. So how do you balance the need to raise that huge amount of money with the emotional burden of the cause itself? What would you say you do or your colleagues do to kind of to deal with that?
I think everybody has to find their own coping mechanisms with things like this. And I think it's one thing is we will discuss and be quite open as an organisation about the need to do that. You really do need to take time to understand and process things, and it will hit you harder on some days than others. But it depends what's gone on in your world that week as to how much something might hit. And you've just got to recognise those sort of really human elements. We're all united by wanting to positively impact children with short lives. That is our purpose. That is why we're here. And even in your toughest of days, when it comes back to it, you go, yeah, but actually that's why we're here, and that's what we want to keep doing. And I think seeing the journeys and the support that's offered to families, you want to play a part in that. And for the fundraising teams in particular, they want to feel that they're powering the engine to keep that excellent level of care going. It's a North Star, and it's something that unites us all to feel that we want to be there for the people, and that we've got that regional impact as well. It's often an unimaginable situation that people are in when they get a diagnosis for their child that is going to limit their life. But we can be there, and actually we can do something, can be there for people in their darkest of moments. And I think, although that's emotionally heavy, it's also quite hopeful and empowering to know that you can do something even in those darkest of days.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And in terms of how you're generating your funds, obviously retail is I think it's a major income stream for Acorns, right? So I don't know whether that's an experience you've had in previous roles doing that side of fundraising, but what have you learned about running a retail operation that many charities might not appreciate? And this is for charities, I suppose, that are looking perhaps at broadening how they raise funds, and whether or not retail is an area that you would recommend, or you might say, don't go anywhere near retail, it's a nightmare. Or, what's your experience?
I think it's a really mixed picture. So retail is a commercial venture, and not all charities are geared up to deal with that and the governance that goes around it. I've actually had a few conversations with people of recent times where they've said to me, we're thinking about setting up a shop, but actually when I've talked them through the reality of what you have to do that, and then all of the health and safety that needs to follow and all of the bits that come with it, they go, oh, actually, I don't know that we could do this. And I was like, possibly not. It needs a lot of capital investment and outlay up front. You do tend to get that back through, but you have to turn quite big income levels. It's a really set model and framework that you need to operate within. Localism's key. You need to know your customers and get the price and the stock right, because that is different even from, one high street to the next, just very close proximity to each other. Donated stock is the king, but it's really hard to get that level of donated stock. Hospices probably benefit the most from that natural thought of mind that people will donate things, but you're in competition with Vinted. And the quality of stock is going down and the costs of retail are going up. You can't do it without a really strong volunteer model. It wouldn't exist anyway. So if you haven't got, volunteers to generate it, we've got over 1,000 volunteers in retail across our 47 shops.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a lot. And that in itself is a huge operation just to manage the volunteers that you need to be able to do it. And you need the people with the skill sets to be able to do that. And then, onboarding volunteers and making sure that they have a good experience and that they're well looked after and all of the processes around that are governed and done properly. And then thinking about the actual delivery of the retail operation. For us, superstores are certainly the model that are working as a newer innovation, if you like, not brand new, but basically meaning a bigger footprint of shop so that you can get more donated stock out and you can have them in slightly different locations. We're going to open one in Walsall at Bescott, and that's going to be the first in a retail park location for us.
So when you said didn't want to call yourself an entrepreneur right at the beginning, I will have to argue the case for you being an entrepreneur, because you're doing so many different things, including running shops and opening superstores and things like that. Amazing. And as you said, there are so many unintended consequences to all of these different initiatives that perhaps not everybody would take into account. But you're still smiling, so I would imagine that things are okay.
I mean, yes, they are. I mean, I'm really lucky that I've got a brilliant retail team that, deliver that. It's certainly not been my background or my bread and butter. So really, really need like an associate director of retail who was from a commercial retail background before he came into charity. And, it's a well set up structure at Acorns. And I think that's the reality, is that I think it's really hard to get into charity retail at the moment if you haven't already got a footprint and a way of working in a team.
Right.
It would be really challenging to start now, because you're seeing a lot of nationals close shops on a huge footprint level because you have to manage them so closely. And again, because I think that localism is so important to it, actually sometimes it's more advantageous to be the local charity in that sense, because you're closer to it naturally. Your staff base is local.
Yeah.
And, and it's a changing world. Recycling used to be a really good income stream for charity shops. It's not anymore. You make next to nothing on sort of that sort of world. Also, when you're thinking about things in green credentials, it's really hard to follow supply chains through. So we're thinking that through at the moment. But again, you're always balancing cost, because you can't just do things as if you were a commercial entity.
Of course.
Because you don't have the ability to do that. I mean, even merchandising is a challenge, right? Because you never know what stock you're going to get. So getting consistency of the brand across the shops is something we think about quite a lot. I think we've just about got it right in places. There's, constant need to think about that, though, because we also know that our retail stores are the most recognisable brand asset we have. We've done some survey work in it that confirmed it in the summer.
It's profile raising and awareness that it's doing, as well as generating an income as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always really hard to put a number on that. But we know, our shops are prevalent in their communities. Even our smaller stores are the most successful ones, are really embedded in the volunteers that come from around and the things that they need and the local things that go on they take part in. So there's a lot of creativity that happens down even at a store level, and a lot of empowerment that needs to happen to enable that, because I think my initial gut response when I came in was a bit of the corporate branding in me from old of being consistency is really essential in everything you do. And actually I went, oh no, actually that would have been a wrong
Yeah,
direction to take everybody in,
really
because you
interesting.
actually need that element of freedom.
Yeah, okay. And obviously that's a big area of your work. And you mentioned that you've got a really strong team with expertise that can take on that additional burden or part of that kind of portfolio of things you're doing.
Yeah.
Alongside that, you'll be working on major gifts, community fundraising. So how do you sort of create some way of managing all of those different strands at any one time without going mad? Or, what do you do to ensure that all of those different areas are sort of, all those plates remain spinning?
Well, it's about trying to have the right strategy in place, isn't it? To know what we need to do to get us where we need to, and also to let the teams then be able to deliver that. Not meddle too much. You chart. My role is to chart the course of where we're going to go. And I absolutely will help them deliver that in certain spaces. My background's high value fundraising, so I probably meddle there more than most areas because it will be the area that's most natural for me to go into. But, we've been quite clear. We've just launched a new fundraising strategy, and aligning that to the retail strategy as well, around slightly different language in both, but brand awareness and growing our audiences, creating an excellent donor/customer experience, and thinking about the efficiencies in processes, systems and thinking that we can have to get us where we need to. And if we kind of do those things right, we know we're going in the right space and direction, because we want to be here in 50 years from now. So we've got to start even raising the amounts that we do now. We've got to keep growing income.
Yeah, so that's sort of future-proofing yourself almost, isn't it, for those years to come, which is, as you said, the challenge is only ever. There's never a point in any charity or organisation I've worked with around development where things haven't always got more challenging. And I think
Yeah.
that's just the nature of the environment we work in, or the sector we work in, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you've got to be resilient in that, and you know what you're taking on. And sometimes there are sleepless night or two for me where, oh gosh, if this doesn't come off, the consequence, am I going to find a hole of a few £100,000? Particularly as you move into the higher levels of philanthropy, the stakes get higher because it takes a much longer time to build the relationships. When they come off, they're bigger, they're brilliant, but if they don't, the hole is massive. And you are often reassuring people on the basis of relationships, and things change in people's lives and circumstances that you aren't in control of. Businesses take a turn outside. So the individual who was suddenly very rich is now no longer as rich as they were because something's changed.
These are things that you just can't guarantee or prepare for sometimes. Well, I suppose you do have to prepare for those changes. And that, I think all of this leads on nicely to the next section of this podcast, which is around leadership. Obviously, you're working in a sort of high stakes, high emotion sector. So as a leader, you touched on this already a little bit with regards to your team. How do you support your team when the work is emotionally heavy and tough? You talked about the possibility that, an individual's business circumstances might change, and that will have an impact on the person that's responsible for that area of their work. So how do you deal with that as a leader? What sort of measures do you put in place to ensure that your team feels safe, I suppose is the right word?
And I think, we do that. That's the essence of it. It's the psychological safe space. We'll all talk about failure. I keep saying, even to trustees, if I am not coming to them saying some things failed in the next year, I'll have failed them, because we've got to try things and not all of it is going to work. And accepting the no's in fundraising is an essential part of it, because if you're not getting enough no's, you're not asking enough. And you have to be pretty thick-skinned in that. It's difficult sometimes. I actually think even more so than people being surprised that you can find hospices happy, they go, how do you ask people for money all the time? Like, oh, where do you get and I think you get used to it and you normalize it, but you also recognize in the people that you've got in the team that, it is a certain character set that builds people up to be really, really good fundraisers of all different sorts. And and the confidence to ask in different ways. But it will feel like a personal rejection sometimes because you'll have invested so much of yourself into the relationship and the time and thinking it through. And that's true whether you've been working months and months on an appeal that goes out in the post, or you've been working with one major donor for 18 months and then they say no after you think you've got the perfect pitch together and it was so tailored to them, and you go for it and they go no. And you're like, that they both burn in the same way. And I think it's, we try and talk about things like that. We try and make sure that we encourage each other to be peer support, and that we learn from things like that where you can. And like you say, and also acknowledge sometimes you've got no control on it because the external environments change. You work with a corporate partner and you've got the best relationship with the CEO, then they step down. And you've got to rebuild all of that again. And you go, okay, I'm ready for it. And inside you're like, no, how am I going to do this? How am I going to fit this in around the day job? So I think the good thing is, for even though I've not been the retailer by background, I'll always try to talk about my experiences where it goes right and wrong. And I think that helps. We do the formal things, like we've got an employee assistance program, and we encourage people to have, open conversations. Mental health first aiders exist around Acorns quite prevalently.
That's good.
But I think because of the nature of the work we do, the pastoral care amongst the team is naturally quite high compared to other places I've worked. So say comparing it to the university, I think people know that they can always come to the CEO right the way down and talk about things at Acorns in a way that doesn't exist in every other place.
Yeah, understandably. And in terms of that, how do you manage that side of things, that pressure personally? Obviously, you talked about how you manage your team. How do you manage your own? So I'm assuming you can go up and you can speak to your CEO in the same way that you've described your other sort of team members can do that. But what do you do? What measures do you put in place to protect yourself and give yourself a safe space?
Yeah, I think I certainly thrive on pressure. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do the job. And the stakes are high, but the reward is massive. So I try and focus on the gratitude of the things that are going well, even in the more difficult times, and do that daily. That said, it's always on my mind that to keep our hospice services running, it's £40,000 a day. That's always in the back of my mind. It never goes away. And that's a motivation to keep going, but it can also get a bit overwhelming. So we joke about group therapy. I've got a brilliant group of fellow exec directors.
That's good.
I've never worked with a group that I've been able to be so open and honest and collaborative with. Yes, internally. I would say it's luck. I think the CEO has probably been quite clever in his recruitment choices and crafting that and the right sort of behaviours and the things that he wanted to see in a team, because that's felt brilliant. I've got a really great relationship with our director of care. So very different worlds, but we will always try and support each other quite a lot. And that's not the natural way it's always worked in other places I've been. I think also creating your own personal boundaries away from work, because the nature of the job that you do when you're in a role that's very external facing is that you can constantly, and with partnerships especially, be constantly on and needing to be at events, and you don't switch off in the same way. And I've learned the hard way in the past that sometimes that can make you burn out quite quickly. And recognizing those things,
how much that pressure is, you're feeding that pressure during the day, and it is so important just to give yourself that space for yourself and detach it from anything else that's going on professionally or otherwise, really, as you said, to avoid burnout, because it's a high pressure environment that we're working in. I think that's why conversation like this is so important. It's building awareness for our own sector and people within it, but also that wider sector. And it's a great profession to work for, but it doesn't come without those challenges, stresses and strains, because you've got a huge weight of responsibility on your shoulders as well, and to make you feel any more pressured, but you have. And so knowing how to deal with that is so key. I get the impression just from what you're talking about, both yourself, the dynamic within your team, the leadership, that there's something that sounds right about what's going on there, which is good to hear. I imagine that's not always the case in every organisation. Do you think there's anything different about, from your experience, you've talked about working in the criminal justice system and for shelter and the university and others, so apologies if I haven't mentioned the others as well, but what do you think is the main difference between leadership for a children's hospice and the needs that hospice has, and any of the other sectors that you've worked in?
I mean, I'm actually a big advocate of, it's not sector specific. Great leadership is great leadership. I'm going to go a little bit off piste here, but I think it's a really good story to tell. I had a really key leadership transformation moment in my last role, because I got to work with an honorary professor of the university. And I won't name him, but he worked in very senior roles in the US military and CIA. And everyone said to me, "Oh, well, you'll help set up this dinner and manage this relationship to see things through. You know, this will be right up your street." And I thought, "Oh, I don't think it will." I was like, I can just see a world in which we're, you know, such loggerheads and politically so different and leadership styles so different. But the more I started to understand him in the research that I did leading up to it, and the moment I met him, he taught me so much about leadership. And also we had so much in common, because all he talked about was how important communication is.
Right. Okay.
And I was like, oh my goodness, yes. And then it suddenly dawned on me that I was like, there's never a moment that when you're asking people to go into war, then you need to be resilient, and that leader and the weight of responsibility of people's lives is in your hands and the decisions that you make. And it just flipped my mindset from just a sector that I'd never thought I would have commonality with, and everyone always tells you now military leadership's outdated and it's old. Actually, it wasn't. He was talking about principles and does lecture in other places around this about the importance of people and communicating the big ideas well, and being really clear and consistent and seeing that through. And that, you know, the weight of responsibility is huge there, but it's huge in other sectors. And being a good leader very often means, you know, having high levels of emotional intelligence, having a real ability to read the room and provide the strategic direction, to acknowledge when you get it wrong as well, and to try and talk about that.
Humility, isn't it? A degree of humility that's involved in this. I think reading the room, just being humble enough and aware enough to kind of adjust and adapt, and not think you've got all the answers, and be prepared to accept that you haven't actually in a lot of the cases. I think that you're absolutely spot on. Sorry, I completely took over. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
No, it's really true, because, you know, and also setting the right boundaries. And that was something, you know, he talked about a lot, of how you do that with being part of literally the troops in his case, but then also being far enough removed that you can make the leadership decisions that you need. And I think in a modern day and age, it's getting harder and harder there's a lot of talk about authentic leadership, but that doesn't mean you can be
Whenever you
your
want.
entire vulnerable self all of the time, because that's not what my team need of me. You know, they need to know I'm a human and that I have challenges, but they don't need to see me having a meltdown about, I don't know, something that's going on in my personal life all the time, because I've got to keep a grip of that. And as you go up the ladder, you know, you carry that weight of responsibility of actually someone's got to hold it together. And it doesn't mean you're inhuman, but you also need to find your right outlets and things. So, I mean, the essence is, you know, leadership is a constant thought process, and you won't always get it right. And I'm a big believer in continually developing, and you learn a lot about yourself as you go on over the years.
I can really see that, Vicky. I can hear that that's happened, you know, over the course of your career. You've obviously picking up on all these good things and letting go of the things that perhaps you don't need anymore or don't work for you at that particular time. And I think that's the only way you can, really, because the people that are working for you will see whether or not things are working. They'll feel it, won't they? And it's so important that there's that kind of coherency across the team.
Knowing your personality and where you naturally sit on things,
Yeah.
you know, your natural responses to things. Again, that is being authentic. I can't pretend to be something or somebody that I'm not. And you just learn over time how to adapt and modify yourself to the right situations. And again, you won't always get it right, and you'll fire up in a way that brings out your, you know, whether you're talking about it from a Myers-Briggs, colour wheels, whatever perspective. And it's just recognizing those things about yourself, and then helping others to recognize that in themselves, so that you can try and work better together. But it's certainly easier in a sector where you've got a really clear shared goal. That does make it easier, even when that goal is a heavy goal.
You talked about how you perhaps have evolved over time and adapted and recognised, you know, where you've got strengths and where you want to improve those areas. What about the sector itself? How do you see the sector, the charity sector, but perhaps also in more detail the hospice sector as well? How do you see things changing over time in the near future, and perhaps in the more medium term future as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've been a really turbulent year for charities, you know, right from international development and seeing the impacts of US government decisions and what that's happened to, you know, some incredibly big mammoth international development charities. And then the impact and the knock-ons that has for recruitment, huge levels of redundancies in different spaces, big areas of retail closing down in charity retail, and the hospice sector being in a real state of flux, both adults and children's. It's not going to be an easy few years ahead. And it's really difficult to future gaze, because the one thing the last few years have taught us post-pandemic is none of us saw the pandemic coming, but then also so much has had heavy fluctuations that you've just got to be adaptable, because you can try and second guess so much. But it's always about trying to think things through. I think the one thing that will remain consistent is that collaboration is going to be key, and more so.
From a funder's perspective as well, I think, yeah, they like to see that collaboration, partnership work happening, don't they?
Absolutely. And removing barriers and egos from the mix to go, what is the best possible outcome for the sector, not just for us, or even removing some of those more sort of traditional views on how trustees would feel they needed to protect the memory or legacy of somebody who's left something and the asset rather than the cause. And I think seeing that shift is quite important, because the sectors have moved and evolved on, and you want to be able to deliver for what that need is in the next 10, 15 years, not just be stuck to something that's maybe even 100 years out of date. And I think the more we can collaborate as charities and as funders even, the better, but then not overcomplicating things. I also see an increasing trend towards, really, really heavily restricted projects again, complex processes to go through. Social impact to the charity sector is really, really important. But sometimes good stuff needs to happen without that level of complexity. And that I'm a big advocate for, because altruism exists and you have to put some trust in people. Yeah. And if you can't trust in people to deliver, that's a different thing. But you've got to be willing to put some risk into the money that funders put into the pot, because you're not going to get a perfect solution, because the world around us changes all the time. And if you want to make big impact, you've got to learn to trust and partner with people differently. That said, there's some brilliant examples I've worked with where that is the case. And funders have really got to know and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and encouraged collaboration, and even paid for the time it takes to enable others to collaborate and test things. And I think that's a brilliant model, and that can work. And I think there's, creating senses of community is also really important. Is it a trend, or is it just something we should do? I don't know, but it happens naturally in universities with alumni, because you can bring quite disparate, unnatural partnerships together because of a shared love of a place. But that's true of lots of other places as well.
The advantages of a university setting is the alumni network, or the community that sits around it, or the community that you can create around a particular project or initiative. And as you said, those different disciplines that people come from within that as well. Yeah, it's a really interesting area, I think. Just on the subject of, the funding side of things again, and you talked about trusts and trustees. What about government and policy? What do you think that government should understand about funding children's hospices that it may not currently grasp or needs to grasp more? Is it a pros and cons to having a sort of 70-30 split in terms of getting some statutory funding and the bulk, not in that you perhaps get a bit more independence, but I'm assuming actually what you really need is just the funding to make what you do happen. And so our government, I imagine, do play a key role in that.
And they certainly do. I mean, I think we're quite clear at Acorns, as are most of the children's hospices I know, we would not want to be 100% government funded. Yeah, you need an element of independence to do the things that make it personalised. You absolutely couldn't do that if you had to adhere to every NHS bed framework and standard and deliver it in the same way, because the thing we have is time and the level of sort of one-on-one care we can often deliver is the difference. We wouldn't want to lose that. It's an expensive model as a result. And I do think there are some challenges ahead because of that. We've got to learn to work better to the government agenda. And we're launching, a new strategy next year. And so much of that is about being where people need us most and in the community, and better collaborations with every different facet of NHS and other service provider provision. I think, hospices can and have been historically very place-based in their setting. And actually, we want to flip that on its head and make sure we're where people need us most.
Okay.
And that's it. And I would want government to hear that message. We're not just a set service provision that exists. We're there to develop and evolve as they need services to develop and evolve. It's a 24/7 operation. It's responsive. It's highly specialized, it's highly personalized, but it's really, really valuable because what we do is what we don't always tell the best story of is the way we help people to cope through those difficult times, and the additional family members that we can support and help people to carry on and live life beyond grief and traumatic moments also adds a huge amount of value. Long-term sustainable funding is essential though, and we've had to battle harder than we should have to make sure that we get some consistency in that. You wouldn't expect any other business to deal with that level of uncertainty. For us, it's over £2 million. So imagine a world in which you could just have a 2 million, no thank you by March, and we're not going to be able to just recover that.
No.
So we've got some agreement in place for the next few years, but it should be longer than that, and it should have a longer term view. The government certainly have a role to play in ensuring that there's consistency of care, and that wherever people are in the country, that they get access to the best possible support, and bring providers together and encourage that collaboration. And I think we would say we would want to be a part of it. But simple things like the cost of national insurance to charities, absolutely crazy move, because why on earth you wouldn't make charities exempt from that? I just couldn't understand and still don't. And that would have such a transformative impact of being able to free up available resources for charities that need them in the hospice sector, but then also in other areas. And the other side of it is around the government could play a role in specialist staff and understanding the need to train paediatric palliative care specialists from earlier on. And that won't just be true of us other disciplines, but at the minute, even if we wanted to, you couldn't just ensure every children's hospice in the country had its own consultant. There aren't enough of them around to do that. Right. So you have to sort of split that out, or the ones that can drive more income can afford to do that, and you shouldn't have shortfalls and differentials in the country. But I think it's about a dialogue and about not forgetting the sector, because it might seem small compared to other big government agenda points, but the impact's huge. And it matters to people locally a lot. And children's hospice care in particular is something that isn't talked about in the same way that adults is, because most people will have had a touch point, sadly, by the time you get to a certain point in your life where you'll have known an adult around you who will have been cared for by an adult hospice, and it's talked about much more commonly. It's not always done so when it's a family member, and you don't necessarily know what people are going through. And I brought this up with a few of our corporate partners, and I was like, I know you've got employees that work for you that receive care from our services. Do you? And they don't necessarily.
There's some really great bits in there that particularly I think around the tax side of things, around the training, all of those things are really key things, and it's really important. I think we'll try and make something of those areas so that we can elevate those stories to the places that need to be elevated too. So we're going to move on to innovation, strategy and hope. So where do you see opportunities for innovation in income generation for hospices? And I know we may have touched on this a little bit earlier on, but more specifically, where do you see opportunities?
Yeah, I think I'll do it with our lens specifically, because I think this is very different depending on the charity you're talking about and where they are in their journey in income generation as well. I think for us, bespoke corporate partnerships and even a bit more collaboration there, sometimes where children's hospices could work on it together to do national partnerships, is something that's at the forefront of my mind of thinking about those sort of things, but really enabling us to have the reach that we need to and drive that kind of thing forward. Hospice UK have been quite creative this last couple of years. There's a shared legacy campaign between adults and children's hospices that would mean we've got TV adverts in a way that we could never normally dream of if we were doing it individually. It does mean it's not bespoke to everyone, but it's how we leverage that and utilise it as a sector and create the noise that we need to talk about gifts and wills, because certainly for us, one of our biggest and most important areas, and that's true of a lot of charities and a growing area for sure. We need to be bolder in the stories that we tell and how we communicate our messages, and going out there and making sure people do understand what we do. Very often that it can be that simple, and this is true regardless of the sector, is you've not spent the time out there so that people understand who we are, what we're about and what we're trying to achieve.
Would you say that the impact of a conversation with somebody is far greater than them seeing a couple of messages on a platform over and over again. It is that personal connection, isn't it? I think it's the relationship that you build with somebody through that storytelling or process of storytelling, which I've seen time and time again. I'm sort of speaking on you, for you really, but what would you say about that kind of personal interaction? It is key, right?
It's everything. Again, you might bias this towards the high value side of fundraising, but in a 5-minute conversation you can convey things and understand someone much better in a way that you can't do in the same way digitally. You can certainly start the journey, but I think it's also about thinking about those points of evolution and how you communicate with people differently, and not losing sight of the importance of the basics of human connection in that, and also understanding, knowing your supporters better and what makes them tick, because they'll give you information that then means that you can make it relevant and just so much more of a meaningful experience for them to give, whether that's their time or their money. It feels more specific and special when you understand them better, and that will never go away, and it will never. And I often think that is the differential between what will make the best fundraising teams of the next few years and what will be the breaking point, because yes, my other point will be around AI and digital technology and how we can better streamline the digital experiences we offer, and even make those feel probably a bit more personalized than you can when you have to manually deliver things. But you cannot replace even sometimes the talks that people will hear you do, and the passion that people have that work in the organization, going out and telling their friends, their family members.
Yeah.
Why do you do what you do? Whether you're the cleaner or you're the CEO, why does Acorns matter? Why do we need to be there in 10 years? And what happens if you're not? And why us over other places? Because you never want to be in a space of competition with other charities. But the reality is you have got to position yourself as relevant and important. And people give to people, and they'll always buy into your personal story and motivations better. And I think if you get that right, then that'll be the recipe for success for the years ahead.
I completely agree. Thank you for that. That's great. I completely agree with that. You mentioned, why do you need to be around in 10 years' time? What does transformation look like for Acorns, and where will you be in 5 years' time, or where do you hope to be in 5 years' time, let's say?
Well, where do I start? I might take it as 3 years.
It'll be 2031 by then.
2031.
And that sounds quite a long time away, doesn't it?
It does. It definitely does sound quite scary, doesn't it? When you think of it that way. Why would I say? Well, we're launching our strategy for the next 3 years for sure in March next year. And, I already mentioned our purpose. We're there to positively impact children with short lives. And to do that, we're going to provide outstanding specialist care to every child and their family who need us now and in the future. That means we have to adapt, is the short version of that. For Acorns, that means we keep our hospices because they're wonderful. They are the essence of what people know, the buildings and the place, but we have to be outside and beyond that. We deal with rural communities as well as city bases. We need to think about how we flex our services to make sure we deliver, care in the community slightly differently, how we partner with people slightly differently, that we really do positively challenge things about the delivery of children's palliative care across the sector, and that we're the voice of the children in every sense, whether that's a clinical meeting somewhere or anywhere else, that we really do try and push innovative care models and try new things that work better for people. We have to keep growing our supporter base, and we have to keep pushing forward with that so that we can have the funds we need to deliver that sort of specialist care, because it's not going to happen by chance. We've got to think about, ideally, I'd love to say new roles, new equipment, new ways of working, but all of that will be, forming part of an appeal in the years ahead to see if people will get behind us and help us make that happen. We really want to be a great place to work as well. And
a great aspiration to have, because that's going to be the start of everything, isn't it, really? And I think I get the sense that it is already a really great place to work and an organisation to work for. So yeah, that's a great aspiration. What does that involve?
Well, I think the line we're going to say is it's where passion meets purpose. And, you create, as I mentioned earlier, the safe spaces, places people can continually develop, allowing them to thrive and do the best work of their career. Things that people are really proud of doing and achieving during the time that they're here, whether they're here for a couple of years or 20 years working for Acorns, all of that is valid and that matters. And that people can have real create successful careers here. And that does mean that, it's a slightly different way of perhaps thinking about things, but not everybody is going to stay with us for 10 years. Someone's going to come and do a job and they're going to do a great job and then they're going to move on. And for their career progression, that might be somewhere else. But that we also embrace that and we want that to happen.
Yeah, that's
To have
interesting.
innovation.
I think as you're passing through different jobs and careers, you kind of take that experience with you. You also you keep a bit of that organisation with you when you move on, and I think they keep a bit of you as well. So, and it's never the end. Well, it shouldn't be the end when you're passing through organisations. There's always ways that you can go back or find ways of continuing that support or them supporting you in one way or another. So it's a really nice way of looking at it. And I think you sort of touched on that a little bit in what you said.
Well, and I've never gone back formally yet, but I've got great working relationships with all the managers I've had and the environments that I've worked in. So you never kind of rule it out because you never know where your life's going to go full circle again. And I certainly know from my career points, if I hadn't bounced around and done the things that I'd done and the projects that I'd done in those periods of time, I wouldn't be the person that I am now. Recognizing that is quite an important thing because it will help us be the best we possibly can be. And I'm a big believer in the ability to develop your careers and do training and try new things. And I want Acorns to be a place where it's sought after to work because people know what they're going to get. You're going to have to work hard. It's going to be some really tough targets. There's no avoiding that. It's very open and transparent and in the world. But if it's the sort of place that you want to give your all and you can thrive in, it should be a destination of choice for people to come and work.
You want to attract
like
talent, don't you? That's so key, so important, and in a very competitive sector where people are moving about a fair amount, really. So yeah, you want to be that ambassador for what good looks like in a workplace. Absolutely. I'm going to move on now to the next section, which is about hope. Actually, so obviously you've described what working for the organisation is like, what those who receive the care from the hospice, what their lives might be like, both from the family perspective and the individual receiving that care. You sort of mentioned that, contrary to popular belief, it's not necessarily, whilst it is end-of-life care in some cases, that it's also an environment that at times is full of joy and connection. From a personal perspective, what is it that gives you a sense of hope about the hospice and the future of the hospice? What can you say about that?
I mean, it all comes back to people again. It's people's resilience in really difficult times, their tenacity, the care that people have for each other, and the magic that happens in the moments and those connections that stay indefinitely with people, whether that's you witnessing that amongst other people or even experiencing it yourself. I think that's the bit that gives you hope and gratitude on the difficult days, and reminding yourself sometimes of the small wins is also really important because you can forget how far you've come quite quickly. Because you're always striving for the next thing and you're always looking forward and you're always wanting to, achieve the next thing, and sometimes taking a pause and going, actually, we've done a really great thing there. There's a lot of joy in that as well, and recognizing the people that have come together to make that happen. Also
to kind of reflect on how you got there, because you did achieve something. How did we do that? Because we want to do that again in the future. And also, I think, as you said, it's ensuring that you're building that sense of achievement and gratitude, so that you've loaded yourself up ready for the next hurdle or the next challenge, and you're going into it with a degree of positivity rather than, I've got another challenge and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, even though that's an inevitable part of what we do.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I know in my personality that I'm probably the most guilty of it, so I consciously try and think about it because I'll naturally just merge onto the next, and that sort of like tenacity and drive to do things is a brilliant thing, but then it does mean that you don't always take stock and pause and hold yourself back and learn to rein it in. So I think it's an important thing to take stock, isn't it?
Definitely. And in terms of the experience and the stories that you're seeing, the stories that are happening around you, the impact that some of the challenges that your patients are going through and the impact that has on family and the individuals themselves, what's that taught you? This is a big question, but what's that taught you about life and leadership to an extent, but more about life, really? Because there must be so much that you, beyond what you're doing on a day-to-day basis in terms of your job, that you're getting from this experience of working in that environment. What have you learned about life in this time that you've been working at the hospice?
Yeah, I think, for me, the importance of feeling and processing things. So don't ignore them. So when there are challenging feelings or moments, you feel it, you acknowledge it. Very often for me, I'll talk about it and process it. And that can sometimes be quite a quick time frame if you acknowledge it and move it forward. But I think that importance of dealing with the difficult is something I've learned. And not just putting it over there and I'll deal with it at another point, to actually, whatever that circumstance is, difficult situations, scenarios, just emotionally challenging things that you've seen, take it on board and deal with it. But I think if nothing else, it's certainly fired up in me the importance of making every day count. You want to take risks, but you don't want to be reckless, but you want to live. I want to live with no regrets, so that when you get to your end of days, whenever that might come, that you go, do you know what, I might not have got it all right, but I can understand why I made the decisions that I made, and that I always had the best of intentions, and I always had sort of a clear reason as to why I was doing what I was doing, and that I'm trying to make things better, and that you just kind of you stick hold of that. And I think the environment does make you more reflective, for sure, because you can't escape the fragility of life. And arguably, you could say it makes you, live harder and faster and love more is the ideal.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Just reflecting on your own experience, both in the hospice environment, but also in your previous careers. Are you in a position yet, do you think, to be able to say what makes a great fundraiser for 2026 and beyond? What do you think makes a great fundraiser? From the people you've met and from your own experiences? And you don't have to say, I'm the greatest fundraiser. It's not about that. It's about, the experience and what you've learned from that experience, really.
So I think what are the pillars? Tenacity, creativity, resilience, and belief. Mm-hmm. If you wrap all of that up in a really excellent and confident communicator, you've got a great fundraiser. Mm-hmm. Because that's sort of the essence of what you need. If you believe in what you're talking about, and you can be quite creative in how you communicate that and accept the no's when they land, then you'll set yourself on good stead for being the best fundraiser you possibly can. And I think also people don't realise what a diverse and fulfilling career fundraising can be. It was certainly the best choice I ever made, and I've never looked back.
When you mention the word tenacity and the word tenacious, what can be interpreted and mean different things? What does it mean to you?
Well, I mean, this has cropped up quite a few times, because I think sometimes people can shy away from thinking, almost success and ambition is a dirty word, or things that you shouldn't have if you work in the charity sector.
Interesting, isn't it?
Because you have to just be a nice person all the time. Well, being ambitious doesn't mean you're not nice. And it's something I lean into a lot. I talk about in our fundraising strategy an outrageous ambition to deliver better care for the children. And that's what we do. We should never be apologetic for that. And I think that's what I mean by the tenacity. You've got to be full of the joy of what you do, to be able to convince people that supporting us is not only going to be, something they should do, that's something that they will probably love to do and want to stay with us for a long time doing.
Do you think that you could raise funds for a cause that you didn't believe in?
I mean, I think to some extent, for sure, because there's a model of sales that exists, whether you're selling something or you're asking for donations. So I don't think you necessarily have to have an utter conviction to the cause that you believe in. Certainly when I worked in criminal justice, it's complicated. Homelessness, it's complicated. Absolute belief in the UK, we should not have homelessness. It is a solvable problem, but it's not an easy problem to solve, because it's very, it ties into the criminal justice system and everything else, and, poverty and how systems and cycles pervade and we don't intervene at the right moments in people's lives. So yes, you can have a belief in something, but it doesn't mean you need to have a dogmatic view that everything is perfect about it. That's true of hospice care, because we can always evolve and do better. Yes, we've just had an outstanding CQC inspection. Can you then take your foot off the pedal and make sure that that's not the case in the weeks, months, years ahead? Absolutely not. So you never kind of stop striving for it. But I don't think you have to have a relentless belief but you do have to buy into it.
Yeah, so that's a belief in the process, really, and that there is a process involved in this work. Whether you're working in a hospice, as you said, or a university, there's a process that you can follow which will enable certain things to happen. I think that's very true. In terms of people stepping into a charity leadership role, there are lots of people that work within charities and they have aspirations to become, to step into roles such as the one that you're in, or even moving into the CEO role. What advice would you give someone stepping into their first charity leadership role specifically, based on the experiences and challenges and opportunities that you've had?
I think don't fall into the trap of uniqueness and buying into uniqueness, because the principles you'll have learned in any, whether that you're coming from a commercial setting or a charity setting, will be relevant and valid. You'll have to treat a charity very much like a business in the back end of things to make sure that the resources are available to deliver the services and the care that you need. I think particularly when causes are so emotive, you have to be able to regulate your emotional response pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean you don't feel it, but you've got to be able to control yourself. And again, you'll always have moments where you get choked up and you can't, but it's just the awareness and the ability to do that, because you're a leader and people will expect and look to you to be able to do that. And I also think in the charity world in particular, you can create a culture of toxic niceness, which is just as problematic as silos.
Is that kind of like the inability to say no and always wanting to say yes to everything, that kind of thing?
Yes,
yeah.
Inability to say no, but also just it stops honesty and feedback and innovation, because you don't want to acknowledge that something isn't working or that somebody perhaps isn't performing as they need to, and you almost stop their ability to develop because you're not addressing the actual issue that's there, because everybody just wants to be nice to each other and wants to be friends, and that really stops progress. And, sometimes the kindest thing you can do to someone is give them honest feedback. Doesn't mean you have to be brutal in how you deliver it.
Being nice, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that is, true of the charity sector more so than anywhere else.
The nature of the work you're giving and, empathetic, all those things.
Yeah. And you need to inspire people to keep growing and learning as well, and to give them the tools to do that, because limited budgets mean that it can be very easy to, cut your learning and development opportunities for people, to really scale back on things. And actually, that's sometimes the worst things that you can do. And it's hard because the pressure won't always come from you. It'll be coming from boards and trustees and the extra layers of governance that you don't always have in other spaces that you're suddenly exposed to when you're at the top of the tree.
I'm going to drop in a question that's just sort of occurred to me, and it's in relation to female leaders. And I think in our sector, we can be really proud that I've worked with probably some of the best leaders I've ever worked with in this sector, and in the majority of cases they've been female women leaders. Do you have anything to say about why it is that we see more female leaders in the third sector? And is that the case? Am I making a big assumption there, or is that what you've seen? And what does it feel like to be a female leader in particular in this sector?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you do see as many as. I mean, I think it's growing and you're seeing more. But historically, certainly, it's been a bizarre dynamic, because in the teams, like if I think about the teams of people that I manage, very, very female dominated. But if I think about the leaders and the bosses I've had after a certain level, still a lot of men
It's interesting.
in the mix. I mean, more women than not. So I think it's changing over time. It's a complex picture as well, because sometimes it's the willingness and the want to take on the roles, and the hours you have to put in is very hard. I don't have a family, and that's not a deliberate thing, or it's not, everyone goes, if you had to choose. Well, no, but it does mean that I give a lot of myself to my job in the hours that I have to put into it. I have friends that juggle very young children and very successful careers, and it's hard and it takes its toll in different ways. And I think we're getting much better at having those honest conversations, that you can't be a superhero that does everything. And the more mainstay that becomes, the easier it is to be a woman who will take on a leadership role. I also think it can be sometimes, even from the women that I've mentored in different points, it can be a confidence issue. And it's never, I've been really lucky, and I credit it to my upbringing. I never once thought I couldn't do something because I was a woman, ever. It has never, ever crossed my mind. But that, as I look back, went, well, that's because, I had a brilliant dad and family and role models around that just kind of went, well, if you could do it, why wouldn't you? And you realise that the world around you is not quite like that. And sometimes, again, it's that, I will speak up when there's an injustice, or I will happily take on a challenge. That isn't everybody's natural state of being, and that can mean that it can get quite difficult. And if it's challenging, you might not want to be in those. But again, they're stereotypes and they do women a disservice, because we're all individuals, and it doesn't really matter if you're a great leader who's a woman or a man. It matters that you understand yourself, you understand other people, and you want to lead well. And some of the best bosses I've ever had that have championed me, without a doubt, are men. So and now I've got a great CEO. He's a man. I don't really think of it in that dynamic, but all of the rest of the team he's built around him is women. And it's all about creating, I think, cultures and environments that enable people to thrive, whether you're a man, you're a woman, whether you've got disabilities, whatever your sexual preferences are, whatever your diversity you bring to it. Inclusivity is important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you for saying that. And I think that's absolutely right. I think it's almost got to a stage which is a good, I think, place to be, where you're almost apologising for talking about the subject of, whether you're a man or a woman. Having said that, I do speak to a number of people that say this is still a thing that needs to be spoken about, and it's still an area that needs to be addressed, particularly in different sectors, different jobs and that sort of thing. But it was interesting to get your perspective on it, and I think you probably bring an interesting perspective to that subject. I wondered whether or not, I didn't know if you were going to mention it, because it was going to be my next question. Obviously, you're born and raised in Birmingham, you're a Brummie, so does that have an impact on you in terms of how you lead and the sort of person you are? Has it got nothing to do with it? What do you think about that?
Probably more so than the fact I'm a woman.
Okay.
I was born this way, so there was nothing I could, that I've always been a woman. But growing up and shaping myself in the environment that I'm in, absolutely, it's something I ran away from for a long time, because there can be such negative perceptions. And I used to sometimes sit in meetings and people would say things like, "Oh, I'm surprised you're from Birmingham." And then I'd hit the roof, because I'd be like, why would you be surprised that somebody, don't sound like I expect you to sound, you don't behave in the way that I expect you to behave, about the stereotypes about men and women. They exist of places as well. I think for me, Birmingham's a city of makers, and I might not be a literal maker of things very often, but it's about making things happen, and that kind of carries through. And there's a tenacity and there's a resilience in the city. Being that sort of sense of underdog and championing things certainly comes through and shapes it. And and I'm a big advocate, it's a great city to be. You get a great quality of life, great foodie environment, brilliant sporting clubs, brilliant venues. Your money goes a lot further here compared to somebody who did live in London for a long time. So
just talking about you personally, we're sort of drawing to a close in terms of this podcast, which is time's just flown, by the way. So thank you very much. Some really interesting things that you've spoken about over the last nearly 2 hours. What's something people might be surprised to learn about you?
Maybe that I used to be a dance teacher.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, so that was a big part of my life. I also credit that with a lot of the confidence I have now, and that sort of resilience of learning to lose and fail and get back up and just carry on. Literally, sometimes even if you're in tears, because you think something might have broken, but you're in the middle of a performance, so the show must go on regardless. I definitely think that has been a credit to me. Ironically, I was at a team away day recently, and there were quite a few people in the room who had links to either dance teaching or backgrounds in dance. And I was like, gosh, that's a weird coincidence, maybe, that we've all ended up in similar places, because you'd never see that as a natural point of something that shaped us to be where we are. But it has, and it is, and that brings it together. And I think, the sense of performance certainly feeds through into my love of events. And I've been lucky enough to do some crazy immersive theatre pieces and other bits as part of the charity work. And I think that's, very different side though.
Tea or coffee? What's your favourite? What's your preference?
Probably coffee, I think. I'm definitely a bit of a coffee snob, but I like that. I do like nice coffee.
And what's a funny or unexpected moment that you've experienced working in the charity sector?
I think sometimes it's just, people are always the funny moments, aren't they? It's the reactions and the responses to things that are the things that get you laughs. I mean, I think particularly when you work with children and volunteers, it's the absolute honesty. There's a story of recent times of when Acorns went for the UNICEF award, they have inspectors come in to assess what's going on and, are you really protecting the rights of the child? And the children that were meant to come and speak to the interviewers refused because they were playing FIFA. And we had to respect the right of the child in that sense. So I think it's moments like those that you just go, yeah, you know what, fall out. And the inspectors just had to laugh as well, because what could they say?
Can you do?
It was the right of the child to carry on playing.
In terms of what messages you'd like to leave the listeners about Acorns children's hospice care? What messages would you like to leave?
I think it is an essential service that needs to exist in the communities, and you can't get it anywhere else. Your local children's hospice will be local to you. And it's really because of the communities that are in and around us that we are there, and that we need that support, and that will never go away. I mean, people might think, you have one big fundraising win, therefore you don't need our support. That really sadly isn't the case for us. I'd love to be in a position where we'd created loads of endowed and invested funds that actually we didn't need to ask for any money for a year or so, but we're certainly not in that position. And if we want to be the best versions of ourselves, we need that support more than ever to be able to create the new services, do new innovative things, take people, support more people, because the need for our services is growing all the time. And we can't do that alone. And it doesn't matter whether it's giving sort of the £5 a month level, or you can come up with an incredible corporate partnership to work with us. It all matters equally, because we really need that diversity and that spread. We need people to donate stock to the charity shops. If we don't, they don't keep going. All of those things, small acts go a long way.
And how can people support Acorns, both individually as a corporate or through advocacy? What sort of things can they be doing to support you?
Yeah, so I think, everybody, it's thinking about what you can do and where you are in your journey, whether that's signing up for a challenge event because personally that feels like the right thing for you to do. If you're a corporate, can you sponsor one of our challenge events and think at that smaller level? Are you thinking much more strategically about your CSR, ESG strategies? And you could have a bigger conversation about how we could partner, what volunteering opportunities might look like, what we could do for the longer term, and how we could really drive some change together. Or like I said, right down to those bare basics of, could you donate your stock to the charity shop instead of putting it on Vinted? Because the quality of stock has changed as a result of that, because more and more people, there are other platforms available, but that tends to be the most commonplace of, instead of, your nice handbag going to the charity shop, it goes to Vinted, and it's not huge amounts of money that are being made on that either. So it is the equivalent of what you would have seen at sort of the lower level donation points. And as it gets tough economically, I recognise that people need more and more to find their own ways. But if you can't give money, you can also give time as well. And there are lots of volunteering opportunities.
Lots of volunteers.
We've got a lot of volunteers that exist in the hospices doing befriending work. We have ambitions to do more sort of befriending out in the community as well. So lots more opportunities to come for sure.
That's great. Is there anything, Vicky, that I haven't asked or that we haven't covered that you'd like to share, either about Acorns, about yourself, or anything that you'd like to mention as we sort of close the interview?
Hopefully it's been insightful, and I've tried to be as honest as I could be with the answers. You never know what's going to be the real points of interest for people. So hopefully you've prompted me in the right directions if I've gone off too far in one space or another. But it's always great to have the opportunity to talk about Acorns. It's also nice to have a moment to reflect sometimes and go, actually, that does all make sense. There's method in the madness somewhere, and it comes together. And I think also for me, it's a passion for philanthropy and the impact it can have on people's lives. And
education, isn't it? Yeah.
And talking about giving, because culturally in the UK, we just don't do it in the same way you see in the US or even Australia. People will be much more open about the causes they support, why they support them, why it matters, and it's just a more open dialogue. In the years ahead, it's going to be tough times. So if there's something that you've always thought or admired from a distance, maybe now is the time to set up the direct debit, or if you can think at that much higher level, start to pull people together to think about how you can have a bigger impact and shift the dial on a big issue. Because if you've got the funds to make it happen, then maybe you can drive the change.
That's great, Vicky. Thanks for that. And just to finish things off, if people do want to make a change for Acorns, just remind us where we need to go and what we need to do.
Yeah, so if you would like to make a change, you can find us on all the social media platforms as Acorns Hospice, or you can visit our website, acorns.org.uk.
Vicky, you've been absolutely brilliant. I've loved speaking to you. That 2 hours has just vanished, didn't it? Felt like 5 minutes. So you've obviously done something right over the last 2 hours. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing this with a wider audience over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Dean. Appreciated your time.
Thank you.